Don't do something with a client that your client hasn't given you permission to do.
Pacing and timing are, of course, critical in our work with clients. But there's one other thing that's crucial as well. It might seem obvious, but it can be easily overlooked. Here, Dr. Stephen Hayes shares a personal story of a mistake he once made when working with a client and how that experience continues to shape how he approaches his work today.
So I'm thinking of a moment working with an obsessive compulsive client doing exposure inside this kind of model. And the person was very afraid of crystal Drano and was afraid of contaminating others. So we'd probably too much walked into, I usually do some psychoeducation around it. Actually, it's not a germ. It's not going to contaminate. It's not a poison. It's caustic. It has to combine with water. It can burn you. You don't want to be handling Drano crystals, especially if there's any water. Actually, if it's completely dry, you could, but it got a little bit too close to just like rationality, which is surprising for me to make that error because I usually don't. But here's the big error. Actually, we were doing exposure. We had been holding on to the jar of Drano, not the crystals, not the liquid kind. Even with the top off, and I got into this wrap like this, and I said, see, without water, I'll show you. And I put some crystals in my palm. She didn't want to come back. I mean, she literally got up. She headed for the door. I mean, I never did effective work with her from there on out. It was like I could not be trusted. And it was early on off in this that I'd sort of seared into my brain, of always ask permission. Never, even if you're doing something playful, I say, is it okay if we play a little bit? I try to do something to make sure that the client knows that he or she's in control in terms of the sequence of behavioral events. This is their therapy, not mine. And I've seen this with the assistants that I've hired. I remember watching one of my assistants with an obsessive compulsive client who, would lock up in the grocery line and have to check prices to the point where lines would form and so forth, where, he moved over because I was trying to make sure he was doing it right. He moved over as if to almost encourage him to step forward. I had to coach him afterwards. Never do that to a client. You almost literally are pushing the client. That's the last thing you want to do. And I told this story of my seared in the brain story of playfully and with good intent, doing it myself before I was going to ask her to do it, to actually put some in her palm. But not remembering to ask permission. I think that's a generic one. Don't do something with a client that your client hasn't given you permission to do. And especially, I find it especially hard in exposure because of this dance that I'm doing of pushing out the edges and yet wanting to make sure the person's with me.
Mistakes can be embarrassing and sometimes even painful for us and for our clients. But when we're willing to share those experiences with fellow practitioners, we can create opportunities to learn from one another and grow. Now I'd like to hear from you. How have you responded to mistakes in your work? And what have you learned from your experience? Please leave a comment below. And thanks for watching.